Walter Garrison never thought he would count steps from bed to kitchen. 43 steps straight, turn right, 12 more to the sink. At 61 years old, he knew every corner of his Denver suburb home better than he once knew the bridge blueprints he designed for 30 years. Diabetes stole his sight gradually, like a cunning thief. First blurred outlines, then dark spots, and finally, complete darkness that settled into his world 4 months ago. His wife, Lindsay, said he was handling it better than most people. But Lindsay always saw more in him than he actually was. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 in the morning. Walter knew because he had just heard the chimes from the old grandfather clock in the foyer. These were supposed to be the people from the guide dog training center. They had been planning this for 2 weeks already. "Mr. Garrison?" The female voice was young but professional. "I'm Jessica Parker from Colorado Guide Dogs. I brought your new partner." Walter felt his shoulders tense. The word partner sounded unnatural. He was used to leading, planning, solving problems. Depending on an animal seemed like defeat to him. "Come in," he muttered, stepping back from the door. Jessica entered, followed by something large and warm-blooded. Walter caught a slight taste of dog hair in the air and heard soft clicking of claws on the hardwood floor. The dog moved slowly, almost ceremoniously. "Meet Buster," Jessica said. 3-year-old German Shepherd. Very smart boy. Buster. Walter had imagined something more dignified for a guide dog. Rex or Max. Buster sounded like the name of a yard dog that chased squirrels. "Did he complete the full training program?" Walter asked. A brief pause gave Jessica away before she could answer. "Buster is a special dog. He mastered all the basic skills, but has a somewhat unusual approach to work." Walter became alert. In his engineering experience, unusual approach always meant problems. "What exactly do you mean?" "Buster is very empathetic." Jessica chose her words carefully. "He responds to people's emotions more strongly than most guides. Sometimes this can distract him from the main task." Walter felt something heavy settle beside his feet. Warm breath touched his hand. Buster sat nearby, quietly and calmly. But there was something unusual about him, a certain attention that went beyond ordinary canine discipline. "Can you give me an example?" Walter asked, unconsciously lowering his hand. His fingers touched soft, thick fur. The dog didn't move. During training, Buster sometimes deviated from the route. Not from inattention. He always sensed when someone nearby needed help. An elderly woman who fell. A lost child. Buster just knew. Walter frowned. This sounded more like a flaw than an advantage. "And you think this will work for me?" "Honestly," Jessica's voice became quieter, "you're both somewhat difficult cases. Maybe that's exactly why you'll suit each other." Under Walter's hand, Buster moved slightly. He didn't get up or walk away, just shifted a few inches closer, as if he sensed something in the girl's voice that made him offer support. Walter hesitated. In his ordered world, where every step had to be planned, a dog with its own will seemed like a risk. But something about the warmth of this presence nearby felt right. "Leave us alone for a minute," he said, surprising himself. Jessica was taken aback, but went to the kitchen. Walter remained alone with Buster in the foyer. The silence seemed thicker than usual. not oppressive, rather expectant. "Well, boy," Walter whispered, "looks like we're both not quite like everyone else here." Buster whined quietly. But this wasn't an ordinary dog whine. It carried understanding, almost like an answer. Walter felt something stir in his chest. For the first time in 4 months of darkness, he didn't feel completely alone. And that scared him more than blindness. What exactly was this dog sensing that others couldn't see? Jessica left them with a stack of pamphlets Walter couldn't read and a schedule he wouldn't follow. The first week was supposed to be bonding time. Walter hated that phrase. It sounded like something from a therapy session his daughter Sarah kept suggesting. Buster had claimed the corner near the fireplace, not on the furniture. Jessica made that rule clear, but close enough that Walter could hear his steady breathing. The dog seemed to watch everything, though Walter couldn't be sure what watching meant when you couldn't see the watcher. On Tuesday morning, Walter decided they needed groceries. Real groceries, not the pre-packaged meals Sarah kept bringing. He missed cooking. It was one of the few things that still made sense in the dark. "All right, Buster," he said, attaching the harness Jessica had shown him. "Let's see what all this training was worth." The harness felt clumsy in his hands. 40 years of engineering precise structures, and he fumbled with simple buckles like a child. Buster stood perfectly still, patient as a saint. That patience somehow made Walter feel worse. The front door seemed heavier than usual. October air bit at his cheeks, carrying the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. Denver suburbs in autumn, a smell that used to signal weekend yard work and Lindsay's apple cider. Now it just reminded him how much he couldn't see. "Forward," Walter commanded, remembering Jessica's instructions. Buster moved. Smooth, measured steps down the front walk. Walter's free hand found the harness handle. The dog's movement translated through the leather and metal, confident, purposeful. For the first 30 seconds, Walter almost believed this might work. Then Buster stopped. They were somewhere on the sidewalk. Walter could tell by the different sound his shoes made on concrete. But they shouldn't be stopping yet. The grocery store was 6 blocks away. He'd walked this route hundreds of times before the darkness. "Forward, Buster," Walter repeated, more firmly. The dog didn't move. Instead, Walter heard something else. Soft crying. A child's voice, muffled and scared. "Hello?" Walter called out. "Someone there?" "I'm lost," came a small voice. "A girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. I can't find my house." Walter's engineering mind kicked in automatically. Problem: lost child. Solution: help her find her way home. But how could a blind man help a lost child? The irony tasted bitter. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Walter asked, his voice gentling. "Emma," she sniffled. "I was walking to school, but I took a wrong turn. Everything looks different." Buster had moved closer to the voice, without Walter commanding it. The dog was making soft, comforting sounds, not quite whines, more like gentle conversation. Walter had never heard a dog make those particular sounds before. "Emma, can you see a big brown dog next to me?" Walter asked. "Yes," her voice brightened slightly. "He's really pretty and big. His name is Buster. Can you pet him? He likes children." Walter felt the harness shift as Buster lowered himself, presumably to Emma's height. The child's crying stopped. Through the harness handle, Walter could sense Buster's tail wagging, slow, reassuring movements. "He's so soft," Emma whispered, "and warm." "Emma, Can you describe what you see around us? Walter asked. His mental map of the neighborhood was still good. If he could get landmarks, he might be able to help despite his blindness. There's a blue house with white shutters, Emma said, her voice steadier now, and a really tall tree with a tire swing. Walter knew exactly where they were. The Hendersons' house. 3 blocks from Roosevelt Elementary, 4 blocks from their starting point, but in the wrong direction for both the school and the grocery store. I know where you are, Emma, Walter said, but I can't see to walk you home. I'm learning to use Buster here to help me get around. You're blind? Emma asked, with the direct curiosity of children. Yes, lost my sight a few months ago. That must be scary, Emma said matter-of-factly. But Buster seems really smart. Maybe he could help both of us? Walter paused. This wasn't in any training manual. Guide dogs weren't supposed to help lost children. They had one job: guide their handler safely. But Buster had led him to this exact spot, had somehow known Emma needed help. What do you think, boy? Walter asked quietly. Can you get us all home safely? Buster made that soft, conversational sound again. Then, gently, the harness began to move. Not toward the grocery store, not back toward Walter's house, in a third direction entirely. He's going toward my street, Emma exclaimed. How does he know? Walter didn't have an answer. Buster had never been to Emma's street, had never met Emma before, but somehow the dog was leading them with the same confident purpose he'd shown leaving Walter's house. 5 minutes later, they stopped in front of a yellow house, with a woman frantically loading boxes into a car. Emma, the woman cried, running toward them. Where have you been? I was about to call the police. I got lost walking to school, Mom, Emma said, launching into her mother's arms. But this nice man and his dog helped me find home. The dog knew exactly where to go. Emma's mother looked at Walter with confusion and gratitude. Middle-aged, probably around Sarah's age, with the harried expression of a single mother running late for everything. I'm Jennifer Mason, she said. Emma's mom. How can I ever thank you? Walter Garrison, he replied. And honestly, Buster here did all the work. I'm still learning from him. Learning? Jennifer asked. Walter heard the unspoken question. He touched the harness, the white cane folded at his belt. New guide dog, he explained simply. Apparently, he's got some unusual talents. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Emma, you need to get to school. But first, say thank you properly. Thank you, Mr. Walter, Emma said solemnly. And thank you, Buster. You're the best dog ever. Walter felt small arms wrap around his waist in a fierce hug. Then, smaller hands gently patting Buster's head. As Jennifer's car pulled away, Walter stood on the sidewalk with his unusual guide dog. The grocery store was now 8 blocks away in a completely different direction. His careful morning plan had evaporated. But something else had happened. For the first time since losing his sight, Walter had helped someone else, had been useful. The feeling was unexpected and powerful. So, he said to Buster, this is what Jessica meant by unusual approach, isn't it? Buster's tail thumped against Walter's leg. Once, twice, like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. Walter found himself smiling, the first real smile in months. All right, boy, let's go get those groceries, but I have a feeling this is just the beginning. As they walked toward the store, Walter couldn't shake the feeling that Buster had planned this entire encounter. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Dogs didn't plan. They just reacted to training and instinct. Then why did it feel like Buster was teaching him something he didn't even know he needed to learn? Thursday afternoon changed everything. Walter had been living with Buster for 5 days. 5 days of small victories and large frustrations. The dog continued his peculiar habit of detouring toward people who needed help. A jogger with a twisted ankle, an elderly man who'd locked himself out of his car. Each time, Buster seemed to know exactly where to go and exactly what was needed. Walter was beginning to suspect his guide dog was either psychic or the smartest animal on the planet. They were walking the longer route to the pharmacy when Buster suddenly stopped dead. Not his usual gentle pause. This was different, urgent. The dog's entire body went rigid under the harness. "What is it, boy?" Walter asked. Buster whined, high-pitched, anxious. Then he began pulling Walter off the sidewalk, across what felt like grass. Walter's feet found soft earth, then gravel. They were in someone's yard. "Buster, no," Walter commanded. "We can't just—" Then he heard it. A voice, so faint he almost missed it. Weak, desperate. "Help. Please, someone." Walter's heart clenched. Whoever was calling sounded hurt. Badly hurt. "Hello?" Walter called out. "Where are you?" "Here. Fell. Can't get up." Buster was pulling him forward, navigating around what felt like garden obstacles. Walter's free hand brushed against the brick side of a house. They were in someone's backyard. "Keep talking," Walter said. "I'm coming to you." "My hip. I think it's broken. Been here since this morning." This morning. Walter checked his watch by feel. 3:30 p.m. Whoever this was had been lying injured for hours. Buster stopped. Walter could hear breathing just ahead. Rapid, shallow, pained. He knelt carefully, extending his hands. His fingers found fabric. A coat sleeve. Then a shoulder, trembling with cold and shock. "Ma'am, I'm Walter. What's your name?" Dorothy Chen. I was hanging laundry, lost my footing on the back steps." Walter's hands moved carefully, professionally. 30 years of engineering had taught him to assess structural damage through touch. Dorothy's hip was definitely displaced. Her skin was cold, probably hypothermic from lying on the ground for hours. "Dorothy, I need to call 911. Do you have a phone with you?" "Left it inside. Back door's locked." Walter felt for his own phone. The screen was black, unresponsive. He'd forgotten to charge it last night. In his old life, a dead phone was an inconvenience. In his new reality, it could be deadly. "Okay," Walter said, fighting to keep his voice calm. "We're going to figure this out." But how? He couldn't see to find help, couldn't read house numbers or street signs, couldn't even tell if there were neighbors close enough to hear them shout. Dorothy's breathing was getting more labored. She was going into shock. Walter knew enough first aid to recognize the signs, but not enough to fix a broken hip in someone's backyard. "Dorothy, I need you to stay awake and keep talking to me," Walter said. "Tell me about your family." "My daughter lives in Seattle. Don't want to bother her." "What about neighbors? Anyone who checks on you regularly?" "Mrs. Rodriguez next door, but she works. Won't be home until 6. 2.5 hours. Dorothy wouldn't last that long without medical attention. Walter felt Buster move beside him. The dog had been sitting quietly, but now he was on his feet, alert, purposeful. "Buster," Walter said quietly, "I need help. Real help. Not just finding lost kids or hurt joggers. Dorothy could die if we don't get paramedics here soon." Buster made that soft, conversational sound. Then, unexpectedly, he began to bark. Not panicked barking, controlled, rhythmic. 3 short barks, pause. 3 short barks, pause. Over and over. "What's he doing?" Dorothy whispered. Walter listened. The pattern was too regular to be random, too purposeful. Almost like, "I think he's calling for help," Walter said, amazed. The barking continued, loud enough to carry across yards, but not frantic enough to sound like a nuisance. It sounded exactly like what it was, a distress signal. 5 minutes passed. 10. Dorothy was drifting in and out of consciousness. Walter kept talking to her, checking her pulse, trying to remember everything he'd learned in his mandatory workplace first aid classes. Then, voices. Human voices, getting closer. "Hello? Is someone hurt back there?" "We're here," Walter shouted. "Behind the house. Woman with a broken hip." Footsteps on gravel. Multiple people. Walter heard at least 3 different voices as neighbors gathered around. "I'm calling 911, someone said. "I'll get some blankets," said another. "Are you family?" asked a third voice. Male, authoritative. Probably someone with medical training. "No," Walter said. "I'm Walter Garrison. My guide dog led me to her. She's been here since morning." "Guide dog?" The authoritative voice sharpened with interest. "You're blind?" "Yes. Lost my sight 4 months ago." "And you were doing first aid assessment by touch?" "I'm an engineer. Was an engineer. You learn to evaluate structural damage." "Well, you probably saved her life. She's hypothermic and in shock, but her vitals are stable. What you did here was textbook emergency response." Walter felt something warm bloom in his chest. Useful. He'd been useful again. Not despite his blindness, but because of everything else he was. The paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. As they loaded Dorothy onto a stretcher, she reached for Walter's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "You and that wonderful dog. Thank you." After the ambulance left, Walter stood in Dorothy's backyard surrounded by neighbors he couldn't see but could feel. Their gratitude was almost overwhelming. "How did you know she was back here?" asked Mrs. Rodriguez. "I didn't," Walter said honestly. "Buster knew. He always seems to know when someone needs help." "That's some dog you've got there," said the man with medical training. "I'm Dr. Patterson, by the way. Live 2 houses down. That signal barking he did? I've only seen search and rescue dogs do that. Very sophisticated behavior." Walter looked down at Buster, who was sitting calmly beside him as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if saving lives was just part of his daily routine. "He's full of surprises," Walter said. As the crowd dispersed, Dr. Patterson lingered. "Walter, I don't know if this interests you, but I volunteer with our local emergency response team. We could use someone with your assessment skills and that dog's intuition. Have you ever thought about disaster relief work?" Walter paused. A week ago, he'd thought his useful life was over. Now a doctor was asking if he wanted to help save lives. I'd never considered it," Walter said. "Think about it," Dr. Patterson said. "Your blindness isn't a disability in that kind of work. It's just different training. And Buster, well, he might be exactly what our team needs." As they walked home, Walter's mind raced. Disaster relief, emergency response, using his engineering skills to help people instead of just designing bridges. "What do you think, boy?" Walter asked Buster. "Ready to become a real hero?" Buster's tail wagged against Walter's leg, but Walter was starting to realize something important. Buster had been a hero all along. He'd just been waiting for Walter to catch up. The real question was, what other miracles was this extraordinary dog planning? And was Walter brave enough to follow wherever Buster led him next? The phone call from Sarah came at 7:30 Friday morning. "Dad, what's this about you joining an emergency response team?" Her voice carried the particular blend of concern and exasperation that only adult children master. "Mrs. Rodriguez called me. Said you saved someone's life yesterday?" Walter sat at his kitchen table, coffee growing cold in his hands. Buster lay at his feet, a warm presence that had become as essential as breathing. "News travels fast in this neighborhood," Walter said. "Dad," Sarah's voice softened, "tell me what happened. So Walter told her about Dorothy Chen lying injured for hours, about Buster's signal barking, about Dr. Patterson's invitation to join the emergency response team. He tried to make it sound routine, matter of fact, just another day with his unusual guide dog. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "You could have been hurt," she finally said. "What if you'd fallen trying to help her? What if no one had heard the dog barking?" "But they did hear," Walter said, "and I didn't fall. Sarah, for the first time since I lost my sight, I felt useful, really useful." "You are useful, Dad. You don't need to prove anything by what? By helping people who need help?" Another pause. Walter could practically hear his daughter thinking, weighing her words. "It's just, you're still learning to navigate with Buster. Maybe you should focus on that first before taking on rescue work." Walter understood her concern. Sarah had spent 4 months watching her father struggle with simple tasks, like making coffee and finding his keys. The idea of him deliberately seeking out dangerous situations probably terrified her. "I haven't decided anything yet," Walter said. Patterson just made the suggestion. "Good. Maybe sleep on it. For a few weeks." After Sarah hung up, Walter remained at the table. The house felt unusually quiet. Even Buster seemed subdued, as if he'd sensed the tension in the conversation. Walter thought about Lindsay. She would have understood immediately, would have seen past the risks to the possibility. Lindsay had always believed he could do more than he believed himself. They'd met 35 years ago at a construction site. She was a social worker, investigating safety conditions for a children's center he was designing. While other people saw blueprints and building codes, Lindsay saw the children who would play in those spaces. She taught him to design with heart, not just engineering precision. "What would you tell me, Lynn?" Walter whispered to the empty kitchen. "Am I being brave or just reckless?" Buster lifted his head, ears alert. For a moment, Walter could almost imagine Lindsay's voice in the dog's attentive silence. "Follow your heart, Walt. It's never steered you wrong." But was his heart trustworthy anymore? 4 months ago, he'd been certain he knew his place in the world. Master bridge engineer, Lindsay's husband, Sarah's capable father. The darkness had stripped away those certainties, leaving him fumbling for a new identity. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he was moving too fast, reaching for purpose before he'd learned to simply exist in this new reality. Walter's phone buzzed. Text message. He'd learned to use the voice-to-text feature, though it still felt clumsy. "Mr. Walter, this is Emma. My mom helped me text you. Dorothy is awake in the hospital. She wants to thank you again. Also, Buster is famous. The news wants to interview you." Walter smiled despite his doubts. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious. But the mention of news interviews made his stomach clench. He wasn't ready for that kind of attention, wasn't ready to become the poster child for inspirational blind man stories. Another buzz. Dr. Patterson, this time. "Walter, no pressure, but our team meets Sunday afternoons. Just coffee and planning. If you want to observe, you're welcome. Bring Buster. The team would love to meet him." Just observe. That seemed manageable. Walter could listen without committing to anything. Could see. Wrong word, but he was still learning new language for his world. Could experience what emergency response work actually involved. He thought about Dorothy lying in that backyard for hours. About Emma lost and frightened on the sidewalk. About all the people Buster seemed to find who needed help. Maybe his guide dog was teaching him something important, not just about navigation, but about purpose, about the difference between existing and living. Walter reached down to scratch Buster's ears. The dog pressed against his legs, solid and reassuring. "What do you think, boy? Ready for more adventures?" Buster's tail thumped once against the floor, a sound Walter was learning to interpret as quiet confidence. But there was something else bothering Walter, something about Buster's abilities that didn't quite add up. Guide dogs were intelligent, highly trained animals, but they were still animals. They didn't plan rescue missions or coordinate emergency responses. Yet Buster's behavior seemed almost strategic. Too purposeful to be coincidence, too sophisticated to be simple training. Walter remembered Jessica's words from that first day. Buster is very empathetic. He responds to people's emotions more strongly than most guides. But this went beyond empathy. This was something else entirely. "Where did you come from, really?" Walter asked quietly. "And what aren't they telling me about your training?" Buster shifted, resting his head on Walter's knee. The gesture felt protective, almost like the dog was saying, "Some questions don't need answers. Some gifts shouldn't be questioned." Maybe that was true. Maybe Walter was overthinking what should simply be accepted as extraordinary good fortune. A man who'd lost his sight had been given a dog who could see things beyond the visible world. But Walter was an engineer. He'd spent his career understanding how things worked, why they functioned the way they did. The mystery of Buster's abilities nagged at him like an unsolved equation. Sunday afternoon, he would go to Dr. Patterson's meeting, not to commit to anything, but to understand what kind of work they did, what kind of difference they made, and maybe, just maybe, to figure out what Buster was really capable of. Because Walter was beginning to suspect that saving Dorothy Chen was just the beginning, that his extraordinary guide dog had plans far beyond anything Jessica Parker had mentioned in her training materials. The question was Walter ready to discover what those plans might be? Outside, afternoon shadows stretched across the yard Lindsay had planted with such care. Walter couldn't see the flowers anymore, but he knew they were there. Roses climbing the trellis, lavender by the back gate, life continuing to grow even when you couldn't witness it directly. Maybe that was the answer. Trust in things you couldn't see but knew to be true. Trust in Buster. Trust in himself. Trust in the possibility that losing his sight might have been the first step toward finding something much more important. His real purpose. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was getting himself into, and what secrets his remarkable dog might still be hiding. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. Sunday afternoon arrived gray and cold, with the promise of Denver's first snow hanging in the air. Walter stood outside the community center, Buster steady beside him, listening to voices drift through the open doors. Dr. Patterson had said the emergency response team was small, 12 volunteers who met monthly to coordinate disaster preparedness training. What Walter heard sounded more like a family gathering than a formal meeting. "Walter!" Dr. Patterson's voice carried across the parking lot. "Glad you made it. Come on in." The room smelled of coffee and old books, folding chairs arranged in a circle. Walter counted voices as people introduced themselves. Maria, the paramedic. Jim, retired fire chief. Susan, a nurse who specialized in trauma care. Each person shared their story, their reason for volunteering. When it was Walter's turn, the room grew quiet. "I'm Walter Garrison," he began. "Until 4 months ago, I was a bridge engineer. Now I'm learning what comes next." "Tell them about Thursday," Dr. Patterson encouraged gently. So Walter did. About finding Dorothy, about Buster's signal barking, about using his hands to assess structural damage on a human body instead of a building foundation. The room stayed silent throughout his story. "That's remarkable," Maria said finally. "Most people panic in emergency situations. You stayed calm and systematic." "That's what engineering teaches you," Walter said. "Break down complex problems into manageable steps." "And your dog," Jim added. "That barking pattern he used, I've seen search dogs do that, but never a guide dog. Where did he learn that?" Walter turned toward Buster, who was lying quietly at his feet. The same question had been haunting him all week. "I don't know," Walter admitted. "His trainer said he was unusual." Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Walter, there's something you should know. I called Colorado guide dogs yesterday, asked about Busto's background." Walter's heart skipped. "And?" "Buster wasn't just a guide dog washout. Before the guide dog program, he was in training for search and rescue, elite level. But he had a problem with focus, kept breaking protocol to help people who weren't part of the training scenario." The room buzzed with understanding. Walter felt pieces clicking into place. "So they transferred him to guide dog training," Dr. Patterson continued. "But he kept the search and rescue instincts. That's why he finds people who need help. That's why he knew how to signal for assistance. He's been trained for both jobs." Walter's hand found Buster's head. "You've been holding back, haven't you, boy? Just waiting for the right moment to show what you can really do." Buster made that soft conversational sound that Walter was learning meant agreement. "The question is," Dr. Patterson said, "would you be interested in putting those skills to use? We need someone with your assessment abilities and Buster's intuition. It wouldn't be dangerous rescue work, more like disaster preparedness, helping coordinate evacuation centers, assessing structural safety after storms." Walter thought about Sarah's concerns, about his own fears of moving too fast. But he also thought about Dorothy lying alone for hours, about Emma lost and frightened, about all the people Buster seemed drawn to help. "What would Lindsay say?" he whispered, too quietly for the others to hear. But somehow, in the warmth of Buster's presence and the gentle murmur of voices around him, Walter knew the answer. Lindsay would say the same thing she'd always said. "Your heart knows the way, Walt. Trust it." "I'd like to try," Walter said aloud. "Start small, see how it goes." The room erupted in quiet celebration. Plans were made, training schedules discussed. Walter would start with disaster preparedness seminars, learning to assess building safety by touch and sound. Buster would be evaluated for formal search and rescue recertification. As the meeting wound down, Walter felt something he hadn't experienced in months: excitement about the future. Not fear, not uncertainty, but genuine anticipation. Walking home, Walter's phone buzzed with a call from Sarah. "Dad, how did the meeting go?" "Better than expected," Walter said. "I think I'm going to do it." Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, prouder. "You know, I was thinking about what Mom would say about all this. She always believed you were meant to help people, not just design buildings for them." "You think she'd approve?" "I think she'd be proud of who you're becoming. And Dad, I'm proud too. Scared, but proud." After Sarah hung up, Walter stood in his front yard, listening to the neighborhood sounds he'd learned to identify over the past week. Mrs. Rodriguez's television, the Henderson kids playing basketball, life continuing in its ordinary, extraordinary way. "We did it, didn't we, boy?" Walter said to Buster. "Found a way forward." Buster leaned against his legs, solid and warm. But there was something different in the dog's posture. Less protective, more companionable, as if he no longer needed to guide Walter so carefully, because Walter had finally learned to guide himself. That night, as Walter sat in his living room with Buster at his feet, he thought about the strange journey that had brought them together. A man who'd lost his sight and a dog who'd failed his first calling, both finding their true purpose in helping others. Maybe that was how the best partnerships worked. Not two perfect beings joining forces, but two imperfect souls helping each other become whole. Walter reached down to scratch Buster's ears. The dog stretched contentedly, already planning tomorrow's adventures. Because there would be adventures now. People to help, lives to improve, purposes to serve. The darkness hadn't taken Walter's life away. It had simply redirected him toward the life he was always meant to live. A life where sight was less important than vision, where helping others helped him find himself. "Thank you," Walter whispered, not sure if he was talking to Buster, to Lindsay, or to whatever force had brought them all together. "Thank you for showing me the light I couldn't see." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in quiet beauty. Walter couldn't see it, but he could feel its peace settling around him like a blessing. He was home. Finally, truly home. Not in the house where he'd learned to count steps and memorize paths, but in a life that had room for both his limitations and his gifts. And tomorrow, he and Buster would step into that life together, ready to discover what miracles awaited two souls who'd learned that the greatest strength comes not from what you can see, but from what you choose to do with what you have. The story was just beginning.